Hello, everyone, and thank you all for listening in today. This is our very first episode of our new podcast, Mapal's Food for Thought. And today we're going to have a great discussion around staff engagement, communication, and how social media plays a part in all of that. And we are really grateful today to have some great minds joining us for today's discussion, starting off with Hanna Kahlert. She is a social media expert from MIDiA Research.
No pressure. Great to be here.
And we also have Fiona McCulloch with us here today. She is a hospitality manager with an extensive list of experience within the hospitality industry.
Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Ken Ume, who is the product marketing lead for Mapal.
Thanks very much for having me.
And today I will be your host. My name is Emma Robinson, and I am head of onboarding for the UK at Mapal. So the reason that we're all here for today and really what kicked off this conversation is the metaverse. So as we all know, there has been some changes with workplace. So Ken, to get us started, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that for those who may not know what's going on in the world?
Sure, thanks, Emma. I guess you're right. This type of conversation is going to happen all around the globe, frankly, as staff engagement is a really important factor. And Meta have recently announced they're cancelling one of their workplace engagement tools. I think it's called Workplace. There's nothing unusual in that. Big companies cancel things all the time. It's unusual that Meta would have chosen to have cancelled that particular product, bearing in mind its focus on staff engagement. And right now, particularly in the hospitality space, engagement and getting your staff to stay with you and to develop with you is really crucial. So I guess I'm always intrigued when an organisation decides to step back from that part of the operational behaviour. Mm-hmm. It was a very interesting tool. Did a lot of standard things. It let you have secure chats, let you build little communities, and there were some unusual bits in there. It had this concept of a safe room, I guess for business continuity and disasters, but it did the normal sort of stuff that you'd expect from a staff engagement tool. So again, just interesting as to why they've chosen to get out of that space at this time.
Mm-hmm. And Hanna, I suppose as our social media expert, I suppose there's been so much talk around Zuckerberg and the whole metaverse. Do you think that he's trying to move more towards things consumer-based and away from the business aspect of things? And that's why he's making this move. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, most of Meta's products are really consumer facing anyway. When they made Workplace, it was very much like a Facebook clone, but for business. What's quite interesting about that is if you take a step back a little bit and you look at what a social platform is, there's sort of like a pyramid of needs that it serves. So at the bottom, you have the network available, the information they have to work with, and the ability to communicate between them. And for Facebook, like, for example, they have the biggest network. It's like the white pages of the internet, right? Mm-hmm. Within a workplace, they have that, but they also had some issues with like document sharing and interoperability with like Microsoft, which is really big in business. And then on top of that, you have like identity and the ability to create like communities and spaces. So obviously it was very good for that, especially post-COVID when a lot of people started working remotely. But maybe we're seeing a change now that we have more of a push to working back in the office or more hybrid working, so there's less of a need for this fully online workspace. And then obviously UX, I think maybe we'll talk a little bit more about aesthetics later, but that kind of thing sits at the top, and there's obviously a lot of different tools available with different kind of needs catered to in that respect. So I guess maybe it's a combination of like the marketplace is changing a bit because we had this real need for online working, and now we have maybe less so. And another being that maybe because it was so consumer focused to begin with, it didn't necessarily fit.
And Hanna, what would you say the importance of aesthetics within comms and engagements tools are?
They sort of sit at the top of that pyramid of needs, right? It doesn't really matter how shiny or cool something looks if it doesn't work right. But that being said, assuming that all platforms are created equal in terms of their function, obviously that can become a distinction point. I think it's kind of interesting when you look at like the generational differences. So obviously Facebook is one of the biggest platforms in terms of like reach across all demographics. But then for 16 to 19-year-olds, they're more on, like, about half of them will be on Snapchat and half of them will be on TikTok, which are obviously more colorful, a little bit more informal, more emojis, and this kind of translates a little bit into the workplace. So thinking about, for example, Slack versus Teams, like Slack is very like startup coded, hot desking at a cool like vibey office space, and then like Teams is very like corporate, like a little bit older, like we've got cubicles. And so obviously they kind of serve the same function, but they have a different like cultural vibe that will fit with different companies and office spaces. And I think we might see like a company will choose based on who they have working for them, for example.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I like what you said as well earlier on, Fiona, because it does strike me that part of the challenge that organisations are going to have is that a lot of their staff, particularly a certain generation, will have been brought up on TikTok, Snapchat, and to some degree Facebook, and there's an expectation, perhaps more than for a couple of generations, that that's what you find in your ordinary daily life. And so they expect some of that experience when they go to work. But equally now, businesses are saying, well, I need to brand because I want people to invest in becoming part of my organization, but I've also got to abide by regulations and laws and privacy and security, etc. And so that balance is a really tough one to get right. But I find it interesting that I think you're right. There's going to be that gradual shift towards how do we create that environment, that platform, for lack of a better phrase, that can cater for potentially 3 or 4 different generations in one workforce, because that's where we're approaching very rapidly right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. Like I see a lot with our customers, and when they're choosing the right engagement platform to use, they're thinking about those things. They're thinking about, okay, what is the predominant age within our staff group? What's going to best work for most people? Because right now, you either get one or the other. There's not many platforms out there that cover all bases for all age groups. So right now they're like, okay, should we choose this based off of the fact that we have an older age group of staff, or should we choose this based off of we have 90% younger staff? And I think that's really interesting to see them choose the different platforms based off of their staff, for sure.
I think it's, and to that point, once you've made that decision, this is what my workforce looks like, you've then still got to define what your community should look like, what your brand is what that brand perception is supposed to be, all of which is still to drive the engagement with your staff. And frankly, you won't know until you put it out there to see what it's actually going to be like. Yeah.
And Hannah, in your experience, would you say a lot of companies that are creating or currently have engagement platforms or comms tools, they tend to try and make them like other comms tools that are out there. So they try and be Instagram, or they try and be Facebook to keep everyone happy. Do you think that's the right way to approach it, or do you think people should be more unique and more niche?
Oh, that is an interesting... I mean, it's a tough one, right? Because you have... Every time a new feature has kind of emerged, all the other platforms will try and adopt it. So like TikTok came out and suddenly we had Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. The assumption is that they're competitive, but they're actually not, because 50% of, like, around half of TikTok users will also be using Reels on a weekly basis. So people just stack stuff. Being unique in that sense can maybe make you stand out more, but then like Be Real, for example, was a little bit too niche, or like Clubhouse was a little bit too niche because it was just like voice note messaging, and everyone's like, well, I can do that on WhatsApp. So you need to strike a balance between uniqueness and having all the features that users are now used to. The difference more emerges with like the culture on that app that kind of emerges from who you're talking to or like watching content from. Like, how big is the circle of friends? Are you looking more towards like content creators, or is it just like the people you know? In a workplace, is it like, you know, a really big corporate structure, or is it just like a smaller team? And then like the algorithmic information. I've not actually used the Facebook workspace, but I would be quite interested to see how its feed actually worked. Like, did CEOs post like a company announcement, like we're having a casual Friday next week, and everyone would either see the post or they wouldn't see it? Like, I'm really curious how that would actually work. So maybe that's a dumb comment, but is actually how it works. You can just like it, like,
Yeah.
casual Friday, like Dancy Jeff in the bottom, like, what is it?
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. So coming a little bit away from that and onto something a little bit more different is the development of messaging tools. So you have an overall comms platform, but then very much a huge part of that is the messaging aspect. And we're seeing that a lot more in hospitality. You know, they're not calling up, you know, their staff members to say, come in for this shift, you're booked on for this rota. It's a lot more of using messaging tools. So Fiona, did you use any sort of messaging tools? Like, how did that work in your previous roles? Did you have WhatsApp or was it by email? What did you use in the past?
So we used to use WhatsApp quite a lot, and all the routers would go through Bizimply, so that's the main sort of staffing platform there. And I would compress it and send it directly over WhatsApp. We'd have various different WhatsApp group chats, so there'd be a main one, team projects, maintenance. It sometimes developed into many, many WhatsApps, but there was a weekly kind of rota one, which would be all shift availability, any last minute shifts that would be coming up if we're short staffed. And that would be directly communicated over WhatsApp. And we found that it's much more interactive with the current staffing base. And like we're saying, with the age related element of it, it seemed more of a natural fit, so people could respond quite in real time to it and be able to pick up and see any cross-share any information, really. So we found it quite effective.
That's amazing. So you found that really helped with comms and engagement within the workspace. Do you think that's because they already would have had the WhatsApp downloaded for their personal life? Do you think if you were to try and bring something in brand new that they've never used, that would have been more difficult?
I think, again, it goes down to a little bit of a generational thing. So for a lot of our staffing team, they were anything between sort of late teens to perhaps some going up to mid-50s, sometimes early 60s. And for a lot, it seemed like we're saying that they would already have it anyway. So it's just like it felt a little bit more personal, just like messaging a friend. It was easy, it's accessible. There's not much resistance because there's just no need to re-download it. They knew how it works. It was only one staffing member, which he was very old school and barely used his phone, and I didn't want to use the WhatsApp, barely wanted to use the text, so I'd have to hunt him down in the garden. But apart from that, I found it really effective, and the only sometimes it would be because it felt like messaging a friend. Occasionally, I'd get messages at like 1 a.m. saying, a long sort of ranty message that was maybe not as professional as an email, but by and large I think it was resistance free, it was easy and accessible, and it really worked. So.
And from a manager perspective, like for yourself, did you find WhatsApp was a good place for moderation? Did you feel like you were able to moderate the chat and ensure that everything was professional and that you were able to delete things, or that your staff members were able to flag something that maybe made them feel uncomfortable? So from that kind of manager perspective, how did you find the app?
So anything that was more professional and was maybe in line with workplace regulations, or anything like handing a notice, it would be directed through more mainstream channels such as email, just to formalise it. But anything informal, very happy to go through WhatsApp. And occasionally there's things that I would redirect to different heads of department, some of the housekeeping team, which I would redirect to their line manager and say, you need to get in touch with the head housekeeper. This is, if it needs to be escalated, it needs to come through myself. But this is not the most appropriate channel. So it depends on the formality of it, really is, I would say.
Amazing. And Ken, in terms of, all of these messaging and comms tools, can you tell us a little bit about the future trends and features that we might see in that kind of product development side of things?
So I think there's a lot of potential in them, as we've already said, and a couple of things that have been mentioned early on about the culture of the environment and the types of staff you're trying to cater for, as well as the brand that you're trying to support. So I personally think that there will be a move towards a more, let's say, consolidated messaging platform that also includes the more traditional engagement techniques. So seeking people's opinions, posting polls and surveys and so forth, that aren't necessarily these lengthy sort of fill in 20 pages, but are thumbs up, thumbs down, very familiar concepts to the sort of the new generation, and also relatively easy to pick up for others. I think we're also looking to see a greater ease with which to create communities. So whilst you can do that with WhatsApp and other platforms, part of the difficulty is you still need to be careful that you're not allowing the wrong kind of communities to develop, where perhaps bad sentiment is festering. You need to have a level of control, but you want your staff to build those relationships, to build those collaborative environments. So the ability to allow for both to happen, build those collaborative environments, build the right communities, but at the same time protect both the organization and the people in those communities. That's another element I think is going to start to come through. And I guess the last part for me is, I like what Fiona said about the ease of WhatsApp. It is very easy. It's very, very simple. But arguably, one of the challenges if you're using WhatsApp is it blurs the line between work and not work. And post the pandemic, we've already got that blur with people working from home, that suddenly it's, I don't know about anybody else, but I know that I can often wake up very early, start working. When I next look up, it's gone 7, 8 o'clock, because there isn't that sort of everybody leaving the office type atmosphere. And I think there is a need to try and separate that work aspect, particularly in hospitality, which has a record of not getting that right often in the past, to separate that work aspect of communications and messaging and work from the personal side. So I can imagine that it will never replace WhatsApp. WhatsApp's got years of history and momentum behind it, but it should be able to replace it as a work communications tool, ideally. But I do think the most important thing is that it should be best able to support that really innovative community and culture that emerges in every single site that's utterly unique. That's the thing I think is really critical.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. I think in my experience, I've come from a hospitality background, so being a staff member, I felt myself, I didn't quite like the fact that my boss had my personal number and they could call me or text me whenever they would like to tell me to come in for a shift. It didn't feel professional and it made me feel uncomfortable. And then even when I became a manager, I used WhatsApp to message the staff because there was nothing else at the time for us. And again, I hated doing that to them, but it was my only way of communication. So now working in a company where we have an engagement tool and seeing the benefits of it as well with the customers that I've worked with, and seeing how we're taking it all into one professional space that is all work related and nothing personal is in there, and that they can keep that balance, as you said, between, work and play, and to have that area where you have multiple aspects of comms. You also have the aspect of the messaging tool, and especially with our tool, we've so many other features in there where we are bringing in the aesthetics, we're bringing in the feeds, we're bringing in the GIFs, and we're making sure that we're staying on trend with these types of things, but also trying to be unique and not be Facebook or be Instagram. So I've definitely noticed that from a personal experience as well.
One of the things that, please go ahead, Hannah.
I think kind of really interesting point you bring up there is the aspect of simplicity. Simplicity in adoption and simplicity in use. And we're in sort of a really cluttered, we call it like the attention economy, right? And there's ever more platforms coming out every day that demand you be on them, and audiences are stacking them. And suddenly you've got like, even because we work a lot in music, a lot of artists are like, how do I reach my fans? And so they're making WhatsApp groups, because WhatsApp is the most simple point A to point B. There's nothing, no bells, no whistles, nothing you need to learn, nothing distracting. It's just a messaging platform. And I think that that's really important, not just from a logistical perspective and onboarding, but also just from like an audience, like a person perspective, and using all these platforms all the time. We're seeing that a lot of people are actually trying to reduce their screen time through, like do not disturb, or like just deleting apps, or just leaving the house without their phone. It's less than a third of people haven't done that in the last month. So that's more than 3/4 of people have tried to reduce their screen time. So you have this almost desire for more simplicity from all angles, where it's great if you have a platform that has all of these bells and whistles going on. But at the end of the day, like sometimes it's just a bit easier to use a messaging app because it's straight to the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose if we were to pull it back a little bit and round out the conversation and really bring it back to hospitality, using these types of comms tools and messaging tools within hospitality, do we have some experiences where we've seen that be really successful, and why our listeners should really look into having these within the workplace, and what are their benefits?
I think it's in maybe linking it back to, I've worked for quite a few smaller businesses, and it's looking at how can we effectively share information. And WhatsApp's been, like we're saying, our only sort of tool, and like Emma, you're saying there, it does blur the lines between professional and personal, but it is something which people do pick up. It's, it's instant, it's reactive, and by and large it is effective, but then it's how can we implement a system which is available to smaller businesses? It makes it accessible, and it's perhaps a chat platform. We can file share. It's looking at even the likes of organising like team meetings and between different departments and a more collaborative approach, which is definitely something I've struggled with a lot in sort of smaller scale businesses when the budget's a little bit tighter. There's a lot of constraints, and it leaves you making more or less only one option on that front, but it's looking at how can we improve on that and make it more readily accessible, really. So
yeah, absolutely.
I have, now that I've had a minute to think, there have been a couple of examples with smaller organisations, as Fiona says, where historically they've had point solutions. So something to post announcements, and it just posts announcements. Something just for messaging, and it's just about person-to-person comms. Something for forums and communities. And we've had a couple of examples where they've replaced those with a single tool. It has had the hurdle of change management, get everybody to dump the other stuff, go to one place. But what that's then done is it has allowed people, one, to all get that same top level information at the same time, which has been the key outcome that was sought. Then it's once people have started to get used to, well, that's where I go to find out what's happening, then that ability to create their own mini communities has emerged quite naturally. And what has happened in certainly one of the examples that I had maybe a few months ago, certainly, was where historically there were communities that were based on each site. It was a restaurant chain, and each restaurant chain had its own little community. But what started to emerge was the chefs that worked would often move between sites. And so they started their own community, which was just for chefs. Now, in some contexts, that could feel like it was very exclusive. But what it actually meant was they were sharing information about each site, so they were better prepared when they rocked up. And that meant they had a bit of an insight as to who let's say the happy staff members were, who the troublemakers were, who the ones that need a bit of a chivvy on. And it just became quite collaborative in that respect. And I think that potential, if you've got the right kind of messaging stroke communication and engagement tool in place, is something that managers benefit from without having to actively go in and create. It becomes more of an enabler, a lot like WhatsApp. I'm sure we've all sent messages off to people that we would not be able to keep in touch with because it's so easy. And if you can provide that kind of platform, that I find that was a particularly interesting example I remember seeing, like I said, 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I've noticed from working in an onboarding team, I get to see firsthand how implementing these types of tools really benefits our customers within the hospitality industry. And I suppose I look at it and I think this is something I would have loved to have had when I was in the hospitality industry, and just seeing the change that it makes and the feedback that we get from our customers. Especially with Mapal, we do pride ourselves on the fact that we are a one-stop shop. It's all in the one app. So it means that a lot of our customers who had multiple different apps for comms and then for their messaging now have everything in the one place. And they've noticed that there's higher engagement statistics from their users being able to go into the one place. And I think as well for a lot of the staff members, they feel like they're being heard because they get to comment on posts, they get to get involved in the posts, and you can make it really exciting and really engaging, and you can really bring it to be in line with a lot of the trends, and you can create different groups, and you can also let them just chat, one-on-one with their other colleagues. And especially if you're a global company, you get to speak to people that you may not get to see in person a lot, but it's building those relationships and working together a lot more. So I've definitely noticed that a lot in my role.
I think that builds on the point that Hannah made earlier on, that the traditional sort of one-purpose messaging tool WhatsApp and similar, it has its place, but increasingly people are expecting something a bit more. So that engagement, that interactivity, it's not just a conversation with one person or a group of people, it's I actually want to comment and interact with it. And arguably, as we, I hate to bring this phrase, enter our AI generation, there are more of those types of tools that can automate certain processes. Now, I'm sure we've all encountered the chatbot that tries to sell you something, but let's assume it could be used as a force for good, that could possibly prompt someone as they're about to go on shift. That kind of thing also becomes an element of, let's say, a more people-centric communication and engagement channel, as opposed to trying to use it to leverage and shove information at people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a part of the needs have changed because we're hybrid working now, right? So a lot of companies will be international, a lot of teams maybe won't be in the office all the time. So it's really important to have like the simplicity of a channel. But you do need more functionality than that, right? If you're sharing documents, if you have to like call someone rather than like hopping in between different apps, maybe you need a little bit more comprehensiveness in terms of the platform that you're using.
And I think you said that hybrid working bit, it also occurs to me, people also now may have more than one job. The days of just having one long-term full-time job is not the norm for an awful lot of people, where they perhaps have 3 or 4 jobs shift-based. That's by choice. It's not something that's been forced upon them, but it does mean they need more to juggle all of that. And sometimes it has to be juggled through a phone or a tablet or a laptop. And so communication isn't just a set of strings of text. It, as you say, it may be an employment contract. It may be an update to an employment contract. It may be an order that you need to process as a freelancer. It could be any number of things. And it could be updates as to your pay rates. All of that sort of information evolves what's needed for an engagement and a communications platform, I think.
Yeah, and I think managers as well will see a huge benefit. I know we're kind of honing in on the staff side of the benefits, but managers massively benefit, because back in the day when there was files and cabinets full of paper and trying to find something was just an absolute nightmare. And I think now being able to have everything hosted online, it's easy for them to view, it's easy for them to report on. And I think it makes their jobs a lot easier, because nowadays, especially in the hospitality industry, a manager is not sitting in an office on the computer having all the time in the world to run these types of reports and see all of this information. They're on the floor just as much as their staff are. And, having that ease is super beneficial for them and really important as well. Amazing. And I suppose to really round things out, where do we think the future in general of engagement tools, comm tools is going? And that can be in the general industry, but also within the hospitality industry as well.
I think that's a fascinating area. I personally feel that the changing sort of demographic that our workforce looks like, that increasingly multi-generational workforce, is going to start to shape. And also, I think that the multi-generational workforce, that dynamic that's emerging, and the increasing desire and focus that hospitality businesses have on creating unique brands, I think that's going to drive the need to have a unique culture more than ever. And I think that is going to define not only what the engagement and communication platform is, but the way it uses and the way it performs for that audience. I think that's probably the thing that I find is going to be the biggest factor. It won't be the technology. That technology stuff, to be honest, that's going to happen regardless. It's what people are doing with that technology is going to be the biggest shift.
Amazing. Hannah?
Yeah, I think especially given like the intergenerational workforces and the variability of needs across businesses and just in general, simplicity is going to be a big thing. Interoperability, because, as you mentioned before, with people maybe working several jobs, the issues that Workplace had with not being able to integrate Microsoft, there are a lot of legacy businesses will have like a lot of different programs that they're using, so you can't just expect like an immediate migration. Also, like things change, people switch services, and the marketplace is fragmenting because there's just so many options. We've seen just in the social media space in general that like because the long tail is growing, like the primacy of any of them is shrinking, and so you just have this fragmentation. So you can't just throw something. We're not going to see the rise of like one big platform, but we will see greater simplicity and ideally greater like interoperability across them. And I think the third thing is a really blended approach. So it's not just purely online digital culture, but really approaching that like hybrid, blended. What are the real world aspects that we're kind of bringing in? We may not be moving to the metaverse after all. Yeah. But it's especially with like AI and the lack of trust that we're seeing rise in the marketplace. People don't know whether they can trust anything they see online anymore. And you're seeing like so many, especially younger people, trying to distance themselves from technology or not distance themselves from technology altogether, but reduce their screen time and take more of an effort of engaging with real world solutions instead. I think there's going to be a push for more of that as a permissiveness, rather like being permitted rather than just like, well, you need to be online. You need this app to do this thing, like in order to check in with Ryanair, pay £60.
Other airlines are available.
But we're the best. And then I suppose specifically from your hospitality background, where do you think the future of engagement and communication tools are going to be for the hospitality industry?
For hospitality it's a deeply practical thing. It's hands-on, it's quite manual, it's long hours, and managers are at the forefront of that, so we're busy. It's finding technology that's easy and seamless and kind of slides into the workforce dynamic in a way that doesn't seem like it's too much heavy onboarding. There's always going to be when you change a system, but it's finding something which is again accessible for all different types of businesses, is quite transparent, people can utilize it easy, and it doesn't take up too much of a manager's time, and it's enough time on other back office paperwork. But it's trying to find a system which is we can relate to, and it doesn't it makes your life easier rather than more difficult, really.
So Hanna and Fiona, I'm really curious to see both of your sides on this take, is how people take in information. Do you find it's more short form, long form, and how they communicate with each other? Is it videos? Is it simple text? So I'd be really interested to see from both of your aspects how that works.
So obviously we've seen a huge growth in social video. If you look at what audiences spend the most time doing, I think we asked about how many hours a week do you spend on social media in general, and how many hours do you spend on social video, and social video takes up a huge proportion of that. But that's a bit of a false equivalence in a sense, because it's very much an entertainment format. When you look at social video, it's something that you like scroll through and you get the little like dopamine hit. I mean, it's highly addictive. And when we look at, it's a very consumption heavy thing. It's big creator to mass audience. But when we look at why people use social platforms, it's predominantly to talk to each other and to keep up with their friends. And there was an interview on another podcast of the Instagram CEO, and he said that the biggest growth they've actually been seeing on the platform over the last 5 years is Reels, which is just big time, but also direct messaging. More photos are sent through direct messaging from person to person than people are spending any time on the feed. So when you look at like getting messages across to a workforce, for example, you're not trying to entertain them. So maybe the format doesn't necessarily matter, but there is a need, because there's now this habit like among users of social platforms of different forms of engagement. So when you see, like, as a manager, you can probably do a text post or an image post or whatever. Like, the format doesn't make that much of a difference, but depending on what kind of conversation you want to have, having different points of engagement as a result of that. So a react, like a GIF, a comment, and then the ability for someone to directly message you as a result of that on the other side. Those kinds of like mechanisms are what's very important when you're actually information sharing.
Amazing. And Fiona, how did you find that especially using the likes of WhatsApp? Were people sending each other gifts, memes, or was it just general text messaging?
So on the main group chats, it's usually text-based. We had a separate group chat for photos, which would be taken. A lot of the chefs took photos of the food, the hotel, some more abstracts, which would be kind of collectively archived, and I would filter them out to edit and put on the socials. So the visuals came more for how we would promote the hotel, the residency, the food, and it had a certain branding ethos, so it had to kind of be modulate a little bit, so I would be at the sort of point of modulation. So the visuals are really interesting, and we found on the likes of Facebook, when you put up a video to promote for marketing purposes, it got more engagement than just a photo alone. And just looking at that element, I suppose image does have so much more power than text, but text does convey a purpose, so it depends on the nature of what it's designed to convey, really.
There's also definitely an algorithm prioritization of like videos.
Yeah, for
like
sure.
the algorithm loves a video and the algorithm loves a photo more than the text post.
Yeah.
So from like a person getting it perspective, it may not make that much of a difference, but in terms of what the platform is actually doing, if you're competing side by side on engagement on a platform like Facebook, like it's very different if you're talking about like a staff communication tool, right? Because that wouldn't be as much of an issue. You would hope that the algorithm on a staff communication tool isn't prioritizing videos over text posts. Like,
Definitely.
So like this post got great engagement, and it's just Greg offering donuts. Like it's not.
I mean, I'm here for it. So something a little bit different. We've talked a lot about the general comms on a system and the messaging aspects, but there are a lot of other aspects of comms tools where we have things like rewards and recognitions. And where do we see the impact and the importance of having these things in place? I know for myself, if I post something really exciting that's happened to me on Teams and my colleagues are liking it and sharing it, it really makes me a lot more engaged and makes me feel really good too. So how do we think we find that in the general industry, but also from that hospitality space as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something that like our company uses Slack, and we're very, half of us are remote, I think. Around half of us are remote. So recently, like there's only so much you can do over email. The Euros are happening right now. We've got a sweepstakes. Yes. And for like the entire team to be like on our off-topic fun channel, just like roasting each other for our teams is quite entertaining. And it's great to get like your little like react emojis, and you can have some like sass about like, oh, the Scotland team last game like didn't do so great. I have Germany, sorry.
But you're winning. That's all that matters.
So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a huge role for that, especially in really like spread out teams where maybe you don't see each other that often.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from hospitality, did you ever in your previous roles have initiatives in place or incentives for people to receive a reward or recognition within their role?
Less so, to be completely honest. It was more, I think it boils back down to just, sometimes when you've got a short rota, you just kind of crack on and it's busy, and there's maybe less utilization of teams because it's not that it's not professional dynamic, but it's just it's hands-on. It's just kind of crack on with it, and you're on the floor for, even as a manager, it could be 12 hours a day, and then you've maybe got 1 hour of office time, and a lot of the colleagues that you'd be managing on that day are not necessarily going to be at a laptop, so we would communicate more on the floor and information share a lot more in person. So it's the need for teams where that sort of structured office type dynamic wasn't necessarily there so much, but in terms of reward and recognition, I was much more just kind of verbal as in, oh, that's a really good shift, and we would brief before shift and then debrief after, and then that would be when any what went well, what didn't, you segue it in between good, improved, and then end on a high, really.
And for our listeners out there, we would really like to see your comments and thoughts on today's discussion, and you can use the hashtag Mapal's Food for Thought to give us all of those insights. Thank you so much.